Jason, I just want to tell you, more intimidating than being on a panel with people that have written books that you've read is having young historians write about your life and call it history. And it's really and in that spirit, I want to raise up one voice and ask a question. So when I read Sister Nelson's book about the Panthers and their work around free health clinic, I'm a physician, and you know, in that book is a woman, Sylvia Woods, from the west side of Chicago, who worked hard on that clinic. I don't remember exactly what you said about Sylvia Woods that much, but to be able to understand, for people to understand that this is a woman from the South whose parents were Garveyites, who understood the Pan-African movement, who was a member of the Communist Party, was a union organizer. By the time she was helping and teaching the Panthers here on the west side of Chicago, she went on to head the Pre-Angela Davis Committee, and she also led the fight in the 80s to keep County Hospital open. So that intersectionality, tying all that together, my question for the panel is, I'm concerned that we don't make enough links further back. In other words, when I was born, the SNP was not history. You know, it was there. I saw it on the evening news. You know, the Black Freedom Movement was my adolescence. So that all of that struggle came from somewhere else. And so when my generation talked about history, we were talking about people from the Depression that were part of that struggle. And when they talked about history, they were talking about further back. So one of the key links that I'm concerned about is that we're not very facile at tracing what Dr. Orris talked about last night. The strand of struggle, we should do it around the world, but at least in the United States, that dates from the Revolutionary War till today. And understanding how all of those different struggles intersect and fought and argue and develop. And until we do that, we're really going to have trouble preserving this little slice of history as well as going forward.
Does anybody want to respond? No. I think we all agree with you, Linda.
Let me get somebody on this side of the room.
And then somebody tell me how much time we have? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Linda Burnham, and I wanted to, first of all, thank the sister for this last comment and remind people that before the SNCC that we've been talking about, there was another SNCC, which was the Southern Negro Youth Congress that organized in the South and had some fabulous women leaders, including Esther Jackson, who's still alive today. So I want to encourage people to go back and look at the organizing that took place in the face of violence in the South in the 40s and 50s as well, until that organizing was shut down by McCarthyism, essentially. I also wanted to, as an early member of the Third World Women's Alliance, I also wanted to thank the panelists for raising up Fran Beal's name and for raising up the name of the Third World Women's Alliance, and also to the comment about Stokely's comment. I really also appreciated Ms. Rushing's observation that feminism developed, Black feminism in particular, developed in very dynamic tension with brothers that we loved and who frustrated the hell out of us, and in multiple sectors of the movement. So this happened in the nationalist movement, where women were supposed to be, 3 steps behind their men, and developed as conversations, as theoretical work, as deep struggles. So I also want to invite folks to look back at the founding documents that Professor Sheftal mentioned, the founding documents for the Black Women's Caucus of SNCC. It exists, go find it. The founding documents for the Third World Women's Alliance. This is where intersectionality developed before it became a 7-syllable word. So the dynamic intersection of struggle and work and trying to figure out how to build community within our organizations as we worked in communities. That's the tension out of which Black feminism arises, and we have to figure out how to recreate that so that it comes back out of the university and lives in our communities. Thank you.
I think we have time for one last question. I see you here in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, apropos of that last question, I was just wondering if we...
Can you say who you are?
Oh, I'm Russell Rickford. I'm at Dartmouth College. I was wondering if we could just identify maybe one or two black nationalist brothers who evolved, Pan-Africans who evolved over the course of the 1970s and struggling with their own contradictions and social contradictions and moved to an anti-sexist liberatory position. I'd be interested to hear some reflections on it.
I mean, don't do it. No, I want to say Huey Newton, but Huey actually didn't necessarily identify as a nationalist, even though the Panther Party kind of gets reduced to that, and particularly Huey. But just to lift up, the Black Panther Party, I believe it was the only organization out of kind of like the major black civil rights organizations or freedom struggle organizations that actually came out with a platform that specifically spoke to sexism within the movement, but also spoke to heterosexism within the movement and homophobia, right? And particularly calling folks who are queer out their name and women out their name. And yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good.
What you're saying is so incredibly important about the Panther Party.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just gonna say this like within 30 seconds. I think one of the biggest pieces we're missing in the idea of a black radical tradition is even deconstructing or affirming who is black. A lot of the narrative right now is missing a key sector of our community, right? Latinos and Latinas, African descendants, those that are becoming Native American people. But I was just bringing up the thing about the Young Lords Party, because the Young Lords Party here founded in Chicago, actually within their platform, when they wrote that platform, it was their women quickly that pushed back, said machismo can never be revolutionary, and quickly started a gay caucus. And I think sometimes when we talk about black nationalist struggle, we leave out kind of that radical imagination of particularly Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Mexicanos or Latinos that identify as racially black or African descendant and have also been part of this freedom struggle. And I think that's a site that we need to be very intentional on, especially when we speak about blackness, because blackness really in America, the way we talk about it is African American ethnicity, not including kind of like the broader narrative that can intentionally bring us together. Yeah. So I didn't mean to be rude or disrupt or anything like that. I just really want to build on that because I see so many Latinos and Latino young people in this room that are not seeing themselves in a narrative that their people have been part of. That's good.
I'll quickly say the Third World Women's Alliance was a very good example of diasporan, complicated notions of blackness, and the solidarity between them and radical women in Puerto Rico is just one example.
Okay, yeah. As a matter of fact, Farron Beal, as was I, was a member of the Puerto Rican Solidarity Committee. I was the Midwest coordinator for the Puerto Rican Solidarity Committee, and Fran and I both worked in the Third World Coalition of AFSC on these very kinds of ideas. In Chicago, as a matter of fact, I created the first Black Latino coalition and conference. It was actually held here at the University of Illinois. And so I think your point is well taken. We all need to understand the broader denominations of blackness.
Trey, can I just say, I mean, Rosa is, I think you're on point, but I also would push back and say that there are all sorts of ways, even that exclusions happen within this thing we're calling blackness, right? So there are ways in which your blackness gets contested because of kind of your sexuality, because of lots of different dimensions. So we wouldn't want to think that, in fact, the panel up here represents kind of a totality or a homogeneous understanding of blackness also.
So thank you for that intervention, Rosa. I wanted to go back to Russell's point because I think it goes to the point that I was trying to make, perhaps not clearly, about the Carmichael phrase. It's like, what difference does it make if there's two things I want to say. What difference does it make structurally if there's one good brother, right? I mean, on the one hand. On the other hand, we are so stuck in what we think about the gender politics of the Black Panther Party, we have not done the work. And we don't know if there's that brother because we don't have that record, right? Because we don't even have a frame to break out of what we think those politics were. And I'm not saying that they weren't bad, and I'm not saying that they're misogynistic. We have a lot of evidence to support that. But because we're so stuck in that narrative, we don't have enough people actually trying to find those brothers who are lost in the archive or whose voices have been silenced because they were the minority voices and thinking about gender politics and a Black freedom organization. So I want to reject, the sort of the laughter and the silence, because that's like, we need to do the work. We need to do the work, and we know enough about our communities to know that there was one and there was probably more than one, but let's not just assume that it wasn't true, and that Stokely's quote is true for all of the brothers in the organizations of that time.
So I want to ask us all to join us in thanking the panel for this stimulating start of a conversation that's going to continue on the rest of the next 2 days. And Dina's going to take us into the next part of the program.
Yes, I would.
Awesome to jump in like that. I really appreciate your pleasure. You too. I've been saying, so many people have been in contact with you because keep asking me.
Excuse me, please stay seated. We have a performance by Ella's Daughters. Please stay seated. We have a performance by Ella's Daughters. I'm going to ask the panelists to please exit the stage.
Okay.
Thank you. Before I introduce Ella's Daughters, I would ask that you all have a seat and get ready for an amazing performance. Say again. Yeah, they're ready. Okay. I want to say thank you to the panelists for setting a wonderful tone for a great conference. I want to quickly remind all of you that we have wonderful artwork all around the room. We invite you during the breaks to view the art. In the lobby, we have some beautiful quilts for you to look at and take part in making. There are quilters' squares for you to make, and we'll show the final work in progress at the final plenary. If you're getting a little snacky, please ask at the info table. We have some snacks available for you. Someone can go get something for you. And finally, you might see these floating around. They're little tattoos that say freedom dreams, freedom now. They're temporary. You don't have to commit. There's no needle involved. Put them on your hand and let's dream. So today it is my pleasure to introduce the women from Ella's Daughters and our special guest. We have Isis Ferguson, Aisha Truss Miller, Ainsley LaShore, and our guest, Sabina Zuniga Varela, an artist and activist joining Ella's Daughters for this performance. Ella's Daughters is a network of women activists, artists, writers, and organizers working in Ella Baker's tradition. Ella Baker's spirit and philosophy of organizing has permeated this conference, so this monologue reminds us of that. Thank you.
Ella Josephine Baker. That is my name. But Joella, that's what the old folks used to call me when I was a little girl growing up in Littleton, North Carolina. My parents got married the same year as Plessy versus Ferguson, the famed Supreme Court decision, 1896. I was born 7 years later, 3 years after the turn of the 20th century. My folks must have thought, what the hell kind of world are we bringing this child into? The court, which is supposed to be realizing some kind of justice, is telling us that it's okay to give black children a substandard education. It's okay to tell them to go to parks and playgrounds. It's okay to send them to separate hospitals, and when they die, bury them in separate cemeteries. That's the kind of world I was born into. But I never accepted it. And my parents never accepted it. They told me from day one that I was as good as anyone. Not better, mind you, but as good as anyone. And you know what's really amazing? Is that I believed them. So when I was 6 years old, walking down the streets of Norfolk, Virginia, and a little white boy stuck his tongue out and called me nigger, I hit him. Yes, I did. I balled up my fist, yanked my other hand out of my father's grip, and I walloped that little bugger for all I was worth. Now, I never saw that little boy again, but I bet you he didn't call too many other black girls nigger, or any other such thing. And if he did, I bet he was ready to run.
So you see, I was never non-violent in that Dr. King sense of the term. I was not one of those turn the other cheeks, take the blows, go off in the corner and cry kind of little girls. Not me. I climbed trees, played baseball, and if you call me, my brother, or my sister some kind of nasty name, you better be ready to either run, fight, or take it back. But I learned early on that I could only take care of a handful of problems with my fist. Those were the small problems. The big problems required more than that. They required ideas, strategy, and organization. They required me to develop other tools in my self-defense toolbox. One of those tools was words. Now, let me say something about words so you don't mistake my meaning. I was always one of those talking children. I don't deny it. You know that dumb expression that children should only be seen and not heard? Well, don't believe it. Children should be seen and heard. Not only heard, but actively listened to. I believe this very profoundly. I especially believed it when I myself was under the age of 18, and it applied directly to me, and I still believed it when I was 83. But words are powerful and sometimes dangerous instruments. They can be used to do great good or immeasurable evil. They can be self-serving or enormously generous. They can illuminate the truth or tell the biggest lie ever told. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Yes, some things never change. But you see, I developed respect for the power of words at a very early age. My mother was in the Southern Baptist Women's Missionary Society. They took me all over the state of North Carolina reciting poems and speeches. That's where I honed my public speaking skills. But they taught me another lesson too. They taught me about the economy of words. Never open your mouth unless you really have something worthwhile to say. and then say it in a way that everybody can understand you. And then when you are done saying it, shut up! Why? Because as painful as it might be for your ego to accept, somebody else might have something equally important to say. As one of my contemporaries, Paulo Freire, once said, the best quality a teacher can have, and by extension an organizer, is the ability, the power, the patience, the commitment to simply sit still and listen. So I sat through many long church services, oratory contests, missionary meetings. I learned to speak and I learned to listen. I carried these skills and lessons with me. I learned a lot from my mother, and I learned even more at Shaw University in Raleigh, where I went to college and graduated class valedictorian in 1927. But my real education came on the streets of Harlem, New York in the 1930s.
Harlem in the 1930s was a black community in the throes of the Great Depression. But it was also a vibrant international community in the midst of a revolution. A revolution in thinking, a revolution in culture, a revolution in art, but most importantly, a political revolution. We didn't complete it, but we damn sure tried. I can remember standing on the corner of Lenox Avenue and 135th Street, many an hour in the dead of winter, listening to the stepladder speakers debate and teach. They debated socialism and the Bolsheviks. They debated marriage and colonialism. They even debated art and literature, war and human nature. It was a fine time. I met some amazing women in those days. Women like Pauli Murray, Anna Arnold Hedgeman, Lucille Black, and Dorothy Height, some of whom became my lifelong friends, sisters in the struggle, if you will. We wrote leaflets and marched on picket lines together, loaned each other money, and came and rescued one another when things got really bad. Without those women, I would not have been able to do all the work I did. But we didn't always agree. It's like family. You don't have to always agree, but you love each other anyway. You see, for me, making a revolution was not a pie in the sky kind of thing. It was about the people. If your political commitment is driven by what you are against and not what and who you are for, that commitment is going to run thin and quick. Democratic grassroots organizing is hard work. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It is long-winded, messy, and sometimes inefficient. You have to wait for people to get their thoughts out. And sometimes people who haven't been listened to very often take a lot of time to find their voice. You have to be willing to let people drop the ball a few times until they get a good grip. You have to be willing to get lost a little bit in the process of mapping your own way. And no one is going to step up and lead us to freedom. We have to map our own way.
But the Freedom Road is long, steep, and seemingly never-ending. By December 1955, when the Montgomery bus boycott began, I had already been involved in wrestling with the demons of American racism for over 25 years. I have traveled through the South organizing for the NAACP. I had spent the early 1950s in New York City fighting campaigns against police brutality and joining with Puerto Rican and black parents to fight for quality integrated education. And that was the short list. But in 1955 and 1956, Alabama was where the action was, and I moved south to be a part of that action. I began working with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Now, I got along with Martin most of the time, but we did lock horns, and let me tell you why. I'm a woman who does not bow down to any man's word, never did. I have my own ideas, and I am never have been afraid to express them. And I expressed them in no uncertain terms. That made a few of the good reverends a little uncomfortable, let's say. You know, I heard Martin once say, leadership flows from the pulpit to the pew, not the other way around. Well, my view was precisely the opposite. I have seen people with third-grade educations articulate some of the most brilliant ideas. I've seen people with 10 cents between them figure out a way to feed and educate 10 children. I've seen folks harassed, jailed, beaten nearly half to death, and stand up the next day to fight again, unbowed and undeterred. So, in other words, I have seen the strength and courage of ordinary people. I have seen the struggle for freedom in this country, not from Martin's mountaintop, but from the valleys and the back alleys, from the household of people with dust on their boots and dirt under their fingernails. These were the folk who were the backbone of the Black freedom movement in this country. And the truth is, Martin didn't make the movement of the 1950s and 60s. The movement made Martin. And what a movement it was. I worked with SELC for 3 years, but in 1960, when some young people in Greensboro, North Carolina sat in at a segregated lunch counter, they took the struggle to a whole new level. Sit-ins and protests spread like wildfires across the South, and I trained my eyes and ears on every single spark and crackle of that new fire. I turned my attention toward fanning the flames of the fire that those brave young people had ignited. I convened a meeting at my alma mater, Shaw, and out of that meeting, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, was born. And the rest is history. That organization produced some of the most dynamic young leaders of its generation. They organized freedom rides, freedom schools, and turned the South upside down with their voter registration drives. They went to places like Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and Greenwood, Mississippi, and Backwater, Alabama. They linked arms with folks who most civil rights leaders saw as insignificant. I had traveled all over the South in those years. My asthma was bothering me, especially since everybody seems to link it to their, I traveled all over the South in those years. My asthma was bothering me, especially since everybody seemed to think it was their political point was all the brilliant if they were holding a cigarette when they made it. My arthritis flared up too, and in the middle of everything, I had to have cataract surgery, but I kept going. I was too busy to slow down, too busy to get sick, too busy to think about getting old. The young people in SNCC, well, they kept me busy, but they also kept me young. I worked alongside a lot of great big shot political leaders in my day. Thurgood Marshall, W.E.B. Du Bois, A. Philip Randolph, and of course, Martin Luther King Jr. And I was involved in more organizations that I care to name. It was a full life, a meaningful life, in the cause of enacting greater social justice in the world.
I always said if I ever wrote a book about my life, which I never did, but if I had, I would have titled it, Making a Life, Not Making a Living. I must say I never made much of a living. I never got famous, and I never got rich, but those things were not important to me. But you know, wealth comes in many forms. There are a lot of things that could be said to sum up my life. I was an organizer, a teacher, a mentor, a radical thinker, and a coalition builder, but perhaps most importantly, I was a political quilter. I stitched together frayed fragments of a movement, working with a team of quilters year after year, decade after decade. Sometimes a stitch came loose and we had to go back and repair it. Sometimes the edges of a swatch were so frayed that we had to layer it on top of another one for support. Sometimes things didn't match up just right, but we found beauty in that too. And sometimes we would push so hard that the needle would come right through the thimble and we had to mend one another. Yes, this is the work of movement building, quilters' work. And this will be the work of those who come after me.
Thank you to Ella's daughters for a wonderful, wonderful performance. We are now going to take a short break. We're going to start the next plenary at 11 o'clock. Feel free to take a break.